I know you're asking today, how long will it take?
How long will prejudice blind the visions of men?
However difficult the moment, it will not be long.
However frustrating the hour, it will not be long. How long?
Not long.
Because after decades of struggle and a year of our leaders choosing the Jim Crow filibuster over our voting rights, our time is now. On this day of action, I call on Congress and the White House to eliminate the filibuster and pass voting rights to protect millions of black and brown voters.
The arc of the moral universe is long.
Join me on January 17th to demand that it bends toward justice.
Hey, whoever has the black Jeep back there, the black GMC, can you please move that so they can finish cleaning this area off? Thank you. Reverend Ward, can you come to the stage? You want to lead us in prayer? You know you always get caught on the spot and you always be like, sure. So, all right, y'all. Thank y'all for being here. We do want to reiterate that the King's family specifically asked that we not celebrate, but we focus on voting rights. We focus on the John Lewis Voting Act and the For the People Voting Act. So we need to know, we're going to have these conversations that are kind of going to break them down so it's a palatable conversation, so we all know what's going on, so we can know what we need to do and the conversations that we need to have with the people around us. Check. I got that from Shaq. So we going to open up in prayer with Reverend Ward, and I'll be your MC for today.
All right. Can we all bow in prayer? Most gracious and eternal God, we give you great thanks and praise for the opportunity we have to gather together this afternoon. God, we thank you for Dr. King. We thank you for his life, for his legacy, oh God. We thank you for his example. And as we are gathered here today, oh God, we pray that you would speak through each and every one of these speakers to encourage us, to fire us up, and to continue to empower and challenge us to do our best to make this world a better place for every one of your children. God, be with us now. Keep us warm somehow. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thank you, thank you. Next, we know that we always have to tap into our roots. So we are going to have a libation by Baba Crow.
Hello, it's always fitting that we do libation before we do a program that centers on the black community. I guess I'm going to pour this water down here, so watch out. This is such a special occasion. So, in keeping with our practice, we remember our ancestors on the continent of Africa that formed villages, who formed towns, who formed empires, and for all those ancestors that formed political formations where the common person was heard and his wishes carried out, we pour this libation. Ashe. For all of our ancestors who fought against foreign domination and fought against the evils of the slave trade, for those who plotted against the slave traders, for those who plotted against the ship captains, for those who shared responsibility, we pour this libation. Ashe. For all those black leaders in this country and in the Caribbean who plotted against the slaveholders, for the great people of Haiti who formulated the Haitian Revolution in 1791, winning freedom in 1804. For all of our ancestors from Denmark Vesey to Harriet Tubman to Martin Delaney, for Henry Highland Garnett, who said, let your motto be resistance. For all of those ancestors who pushed the U.S. towards a civil war, we pour this libation. Ashe. For all of our ancestors who who suffered during Reconstruction, who were elected to office, for all of our ancestors who voted for them, only to find their hopes dashed by a revived Ku Klux Klan, red shirts, other unspeakable evil people. We pour this libation for all of our ancestors who came back in the 20th century, for all those who voted for Oscar D. Priest in Chicago in 1920 to send him to Congress, for all those ancestors who went down south into Mississippi, for Bob Moses, who we just lost, the great Bob Moses, for Fannie Lou Hamer, for Septima Clark, for Florence Tate from Dayton, and all of our ancestors that supported SNCC and the SCLC, and for the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who pushed for voting rights and civil rights in the South and in the North and in the world. We pour this libation. And for the better world that we will live because we struggle and because we study for the promise of a future where the children are laughing at a million hipper happenings than the ones we've been having, just to spread a little love to all those babies on the way. We pour this libation.
Say.
Ashe. Oh!
Thank you, Baba Crow. Once again, I say we got some new people trickling in. There's no celebration without legislation. Those are words specifically from Dr. Martin Luther King. That's what the march was for. We were fighting for our voting rights. We're still fighting. When I say when we fight, we win, say we win. When we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. We the people continue to fight in a country where Juneteenth is a national holiday, but we're not allowed to talk about why. We're still fighting. Mayor Mills with the welcome.
I'm not sure if it's still morning, but first of all, thank you all for being here. It's always, always special when people come out to recognize and support Dr. Martin Luther King, as well as the issues that he fought for. The voting rights. I listen to the news every day, and they talk about issues in terms of voting, and the voting rights and how those things are being stripped away from us. How in 1965, we got the voting rights that allowed people of color to vote. It wasn't too long before that the women had just gotten the right to vote. And this is a country that so many of us fight for every day. Raise your family, raise your kids, get jobs, go to work, support other people, all fighting for high quality of life, set of opportunities, jobs, health care, a roof over your head, and then you all volunteer. You volunteer to help other people doing things to create good conditions for life. And as I listened earlier today in the news, while we had news people and others blaming President Biden for not being able to get the Voting Rights Act passed. It's not Biden's fault for not getting the Voting Rights passed. It's our fault for who we didn't vote for in 2010. So I said, well, 2010. President Obama was elected in 2008. A lot of us relaxed. We got our first African-American president. We knew what he was saying. We knew what he was standing for. We had a strong belief that he was going to do the right thing for us. And we thought he could do it all by himself. So we didn't turn out to vote in 2010, the off-year election, to make sure that he had a Congress and a Senate that could pass the legislation that he put forth. And we lost that. We lost that. So we try to fight now to try to get back.
That's right. Come on, make it real.
As we try to get back now, we're fighting uphill now. People say, oh, if somebody like him got in as president, we must have done something wrong, so we got to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now, a lot of you know that I mentor black males. I've been doing it for 45, 50 years. And I told them when President Obama got elected, I said, why are they giving him such a hard time? The obvious answer for some is he's black. I said, yeah, that's one. But what's the other one? They scratch their head, they come up with, well, honestly, I don't know. I said, let me tell you why. They don't want any more Obamas. That's why. They don't want any more young black men growing up, staying out of trouble, getting educated, getting married before they have kids, taking care of their wife, taking care of their kids, supporting themselves, and making sure that the kids, their family, do the right thing. They don't want that. If you cut off the black male, you cut off any male, you cut off the family. You make it difficult for them to be successful. So as we move forward trying to understand why we're in this situation, because we did not do what we need to do in 2010. Now that doesn't mean we lay down. As Dave just said, when we fight, we win, you damn right. We gotta fight and win and make sure we get more of you registered to vote. We get more of you look at the voting records of those who you have put in office. Look at mine. Look at my colleagues. Hold us accountable for fighting for you, because I believe in my heart that that's what we're there for. We all came up here, we're all in these positions to support you. And we gotta support the things that make things better for you. So when we look at gerrymandering, the way they have drawn these districts, where they determine who they want to vote for them, not by virtue of going out campaigning for them and getting them to sit down and listen to the issues that they talk about that's going to benefit you at your kitchen table in your neighborhood. They don't do it that way. They look at your color, your race, your ethnicity, and then they try to draw boundaries and lines so they get those votes. Those are the votes they want. And somebody sometimes don't know who's fighting and how they're fighting. I suppose, where's my man Oscar at? Where's Oscar? I've been fighting for this little rascal when he was a knucklehead.
And I appreciate it.
Man, he was a knucklehead too, trust me. All right? Now, but we fight because we care. We fight because we care. I'm trying to think. And these folks up here because they care. So I'm going to stop right now, because I know it's cold. It's cold. I'm cold, you cold, and I want you to go home and get warm. But I just want you to understand, as we do things to get young people to vote and take you to the polls, I want you to come with us. I want you to come with us. Your little nephews who are 18 years old and older, as we go and vote, I want you to come with us. Don't tell them who to vote for, but let them read and understand. But I need you to be with me as we take those young people to vote. Thank you so much, and bless you for being out here.
Thank you. I tell them who to vote for.
Next, we're going to have Dr. Chad White come and talk about the John Lewis Voting Act, so we can kind of get a sense of what it is and what it is we're talking about.
Good morning, everyone. It's cold, but this is a serious matter. And in the words of Dr. King, we got to get this thing right. Sadly, the right to vote has strategically been denied to too many American citizens, and African American citizens in particular. During the Jim Crow era, literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, job loss, physical intimidation, and the threat of death were used to disenfranchise blacks who desire to participate in American democracy. Lyndon B. Johnson, in his presidential address on March 5th, 1965, argued, reviewing the history of black suffrage in the South, every device has been used to deny blacks the right to vote. The methods have changed, but the intent and impact remain the same. Today, barriers such as gerrymandering, voter ID laws, roll purging, misinformation, and disinformation are used to keep marginalized populations, in particular people that look like me, from voting. Every American citizen's full enfranchisement is essential to the actualization of the democratic ideals in the American Democrat experiment's achievement. In 1957, Dr. King, the last speaker at the National Prayer Pilgrimage, stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and demanded that America live up to its noble ideas. In his speech, "Give Us the Ballot." We've heard about Malcolm X's The Ballot of the Bullet, but very seldom do we hear about Dr. King's speech, "Give Us the Ballot." He argues that, watch this, Congress and President, both political parties, are guilty of willfully neglecting the impact of racism, economic disparities, voter suppression, and betraying the African Americans' trust in both parties. At the end of his speech, he says, these men, these politicians that continue to fight against full enfranchisement have a high blood pressure of words and an amnesia of deeds. And can I tell you that voter suppression remains on the rise today? In 2021 alone, at least 19 states enacted laws that make it harder to vote, while at least 13 states have restricted voting laws and bills that have been pre-filed for the 2022 legislative sessions. No fewer than 152 restrictive voting bills will carry over from last year. 4 other restrictive laws that passed in 2021 are monster voter suppression packages that include dozens of voting access rollbacks. 2 of these monster laws are in states that would have been covered by the version of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act before the Senate. Those states would be Texas and Georgia, not surprisingly. And the third is Florida, that these states would have not been able to do what they're doing if the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was in place. Now, just a little bit about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The critiques offered by opponents of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act are flimsy and transparent. The subtext comes through loud and clear. They don't want black people to vote. I can go into all the details and all the intricacies, but I'm not doing it. It's too cold. But at the end of the day, it is driven by racism. And whenever voter suppression is effective, whenever voter turnout is low, conservatives always win. For the People Act, introduced as H.R. 1 as a bill in the United States Congress, expands the voting rights, changes campaign finance laws, and reduces the influence of money in politics. Also, it fights against this willful and reckless gerrymandering. As I close, the right to vote is at the heart of the American ideals of democracy and serves as a foundation for a profoundly democratic vision. The right to vote is a human dignity issue. If I can vote, I can have self-direction. If I can vote, I can change my future. But if I have no vote, I have no voice. Enslaved blacks, I'm done, and the sons and daughters of enslaved blacks have fought in every war that American soldiers have fired a gun. From the American Revolution to the war on terrorism, African Americans have spilled their blood for the democratic dream. James Baldwin reminds us that the disinherited and disowned, that this is your home. We're not going anywhere. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again, and we can make America what America should be. American citizens, regardless of skin color, deserve to be treated with justice and equality. Justice mandates equal treatment under the law. America has singularly accomplished inscribing otherness into every aspect of African American life. And I'm crushing through the field that the right to vote is important. It's essential because democracy loses a snippet of its beauty every time a roadblock is fabricated to prohibit black people from having access to the voting booth. We have to vote, and in order to have a voice, we have to vote. Thank you.
Dr. King said voting is the best nonviolent tool, the strongest nonviolent tool that we have. So we must utilize that. Voting is not a privilege. I'm sorry, voting is not a privilege. It's a right. when we fight? Brother Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would like to greet all of you in the greeting words of peace. We say it in the Arabic language of Assalamu alaikum. So here we have in 1870s the 15th Amendment being passed that gave the black man the right to vote. The black woman, however, was not given the right until the 19th Amendment. But she wasn't given the free right to vote until 1965. So here you have a number of measures that were taken that we got the vote, but then they started giving, like counting beans in a jar. They had a poll tax where if you didn't own land, and you know that many of us who got out of slavery went right into sharecropping, which was just another form of slavery. So you had a poll tax, you had a literacy test, and I might need to check that out myself. You had a literacy test. Well, remember that slaves were not given the right to read or write. And if they were caught being educated, the slave would be executed. And the one that taught the slave would also be persecuted and executed. They had the grandfather clause. They had the violent intimidations. And we all know what that means. That means strange fruit with blood at the root, lynchings, right? And the great migration to the north. You had the convict of felony, right? So that was the 13th Amendment. So they had already set it up that if you are convicted of a crime, your rights to vote would be stripped. So my thing is this: they're always coming up with something new. It's always a filibuster. It's closing the voting polls down before you can get off work. There's always something new. But one thing that we can do, brothers and sisters, is that the power is always in our hands. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said that our unity is more powerful than an atomic bomb. When we look at the Chinese in Chinatown, they have unity. When we look at the Italians in Little Italy, they have unity. When we look at the Haitians in Little Haiti, they have unity. We have the West Side, but we're not unified. We have to unify, and if we unify, we can get things done, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Next we have Kenya Baker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to exhort you today to awake the Abrams in you. I recently watched a hurdler in a hurdle race, and it was on one of those comedy shows, so it was meant to be funny, but it sent a message to me. That hurdler started off taking the first 2 hurdles and failed disastrously, practically tumbled to the ground. But what that hurdler did not do was stop running to the finish line. He continued to barrel through the next hurdles, not even making an attempt to jump them. This voting season, we cannot afford to jump hurdles, but what we can do is make a couple attempts, as that hurdler from the prior narrative did. Abrams noted 2 critical hurdles for us to consider in these coming elections. Diversity, first hurdle. Abrams believed in diversifying black strength is critical, but it is not exclusive. We must come together with our counterparts, locking arms as King did, with all nationalities, if we intend on exacting change. That is what he taught us. The common thread that strengthens our tapestry and solidarity through diversity. It is the work that we do together that makes us a force of manifestation. Envision the the creation of Gem City Market. It was birthed out of our diversity, our solidarity, our collective power, and our collective will. The second hurdle, new voters. Awake the Abrams in you. Let's get voters registered. Brother Carlos has registrations. Please pick up some and share them. Share them with the young voters. Abrams recognized that this coming election is going to be skewed with young voters. Our Mayor Mims pointed out, young voters. Get our young voters engaged in this system and encourage them to understand who the candidates are, what the issues are. Awake the Abrams in you. Hurdle through. I believe that we can definitely make a change. We are that mesmerizing view that we noticed when we looked this past season. Some of the trees are still adorned. Their lights interconnected. The more elaborate the design, the more lights that are interconnected. Light up this season. Light up this voting season by interconnecting. Make it colorful. Make it diverse. And awake the Abrams in you.
Thank you. It's going to take that collective power for us to do anything. It takes us all of us or none of us. Carlos Buford.
Thank you, Deja. On November 8th, 2021, acclaimed talk show host and lifetime civil rights advocate Joe Madison went on a hunger strike for voting rights. Mr. Madison is a native Daytonian and a graduate of the original West 3rd Street Roosevelt High School. Today, during the national holiday of Martin Luther King Jr., Joe Madison is on day number 71 of his hunger strike, a sacrifice he has committed to for the sake of saving our democracy. Mr. Madison, in his own words, said, "I have experienced several physical changes as part of this action, but I have vowed to abstain from solid food until the Senate reforms the filibuster or passes the Freedom to Vote Act or passes the John Lewis Voting Rights Act." That said, we stand in solidarity with Joe Madison to honor him for putting his life on the line in protecting the right to vote in America. On this stage, standing with me, is a classmate of Joe Madison. That's his picture. And also standing with an organization who has vowed to make sure that they start doing voter registrations this year at their events. They too have committed themselves to standing in solidarity with Joe Madison by making the necessary calls to our Senators Manchin and Sinema, and also joining forces with local organizations and local leaders in calling for action in protecting the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to have Dr. Fox come talk about the filibuster.
Good afternoon. Originally, the filibuster had a purpose. That purpose was for the minority that was in the Senate to be able to have an opportunity to debate an issue. It came into existence in 1805 with the Vice President Aaron Burr. Burr wanted the ability to have a rule to be changed in the Senate so that the individuals could extend the conversation as it relates to a bill. it lasted for nearly 30 years that there was really no movement with the filibuster. 1856, it became known as the filibuster. It gets its name from a Dutch word which means pirate. Pirates took ships and held them in captivity. What the filibuster does is takes the Senate and hold it captive so that bills cannot be passed. Historically, the filibuster didn't do too much from 1856 to all the way to 1957. Something happened in 1957 for the filibusters to start being used. That was the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which brought about the ability to bring out voting rights for blacks here in America. Strom Thurmond, senator from South Carolina, did not want blacks to get the ability to vote. So he was willing to filibuster some 28 hours and 13 minutes to make sure, or tried to make sure, that the Civil Rights Bill would not be passed. Nevertheless, it was passed. The filibuster, as far as we are concerned, is a racist tactic. President Obama calls it a Jim Crow relic. The filibuster was not used too much after 1957 until President Obama got into office. Then the filibuster raised its ugly head again. And just about everything that President Obama wanted to happen, the filibuster was able to be used to stop bills from being passed. Today, as we're trying to get our voting rights to be taken place, once again the filibuster has raised its ugly head. There are 100 senators. This is the fourth time in the history of America where there is a 50-50 group within the Senate. 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. To pass that, you have what is called a simple majority, which is 50 votes against 51.
Thank you, baby.
Kamala Harris, which is the vice president, becomes a 51 vote. What we need to have is a change in the Senate Rule 22, which came into existence in 1917. Have that rule changed so that there'll be a simple majority so that the bills can be passed. By the way, Senator Kamala Harris, when she was a senator, has an understanding of how all this takes place. Joe Biden, which is the president, who was a senator, also has an understanding of how this takes place. Kamala Harris now is the vice president and is over the Senate. And she can have the power to bring about a constitutional rule to deal with the filibuster. The filibuster is not in the Constitution, but because she is the vice president, she can call for a vote to bring about the fact that this filibuster is unconstitutional. So this is what we're demanding. The possibility of her being able to do this, along with the possibility of getting Manchin and Sinema on board, we can fight this filibuster and bring about the kind of rules and regulations that Joe Biden is trying to put in place for us. Let's yell this loud. Shut your mouths and vote.
Shut your mouth and vote.
Thank you. We do have some people going around with hand warmers. If you need some, here they go right here. Next, we're going to have Commissioner Fairchild come up and say a few words.
Peace to you. Shalom. Shalom. Salam alaikum. Walaikum salam, sir. Those are not just simple greetings, but they are speech acts. A speech act is like God saying, let there be light, and there was light. Jesus, in the midst of the storm, said, peace, be still, and the storm was what? Still. So when we speak as vessels of God, we take our speech and put it into act. And peace is not a simple concept. Shalom is not a simple concept. It is God's will. It's God's righteousness that we are speaking into existence. It's God's deep desire for God's fullness of life for all people. Peace is not simply the absence of violence or war or conflict. It's the presence of God's full life. It's peace and love and justice in our personal relationships, and it's justice and righteous in the structures of society. In the United States, where we believe in self-governance, you cannot have self-governance without full voting rights, without fair districts. If we want God's righteousness, if we want God's will in our lives, in our city, our county, our state, our nation, we will speak into existence voting rights for every citizen, fair districts in every district. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Peace to you.
Peace.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next we have the Miss Shannon Iceman from the YWCA Dayton.
I ache that we are still doing this. I groan for those who have taken the elements as we're doing today and spending good energy in speaking about something that is intrinsically and inherently ours. It is the long lines, the voter ID requirements, the lack of language access, the voter roll purges, the polling place closures, the consolidation, the moves, the lack of funding for elections, the provisional ballot requirements, the reduced early voting, the no more Sunday voting, the reduced voting hours, the poorly trained poll workers, the partisan election administrators, the gerrymandering, the communities that ensure that minority votes are diluted.
Hold it.
And what do I see from us? Our disconnection, our unaccountability, our apathy, our loss of knowing who we are and whose we are, the loss of our fight, our lack, our will to lose or to educate our young. Where is the demand that our young are here? And yet, we are still in this place, hoping for something different. We are still in this place doing the exact same thing that we have always done, have always had to do, showing up, asking, marching, pleading, demanding, and then waiting for someone else to do the right thing, to treat all people with intrinsic value and with inherent dignity, deserving to have voice and choice and rights, and no one is going to save us. No one. No one is going to raise the voice and demand. This is your job.
Yes. Come on.
We are still here. This is not joyous. Fighting the good fight that so many of our forefathers have done, still being challenged with what our grandmothers have done, what our grandfathers have done, what our great-great-great-great-grandparents have had to endure, spending our time not celebrating the life of Martin Luther King, but picking up the same heavy mantle that bears the weight of injustice. He talked about it, of inequality, of racism, of racism, of racism. We cannot take for granted We will not take for granted the toll that this fight, the right to vote, has taken on the lives of people whose names we know and the stories we think we remember, to the names that can't come to mind or are not on anyone's record. We know that people were lynched. We know they were beaten, and they were maimed, and they were shot, and they were tortured for our right. We know they lost property, that lost family, lost income, lost their lives for the right to live, for the right to vote. We know, and yet we are still here. Following the 2020 election, an unprecedented wave of restricted voting laws were passed by states with more likely to come in the years ahead. Right now, there are 19 states passing 34 restricted access voting laws. Right now, there's more than 440 bills with provisions that restrict voting access that are introduced in 49 states, which is the largest number of bills in over 10 years. As we turn the calendar so far, there's at least 13 bills restricting the access to vote that are already been pre-filed. We are still here. I will close that don't you leave here thinking you've done something by showing up and not knowing who your senator is or who your congressperson is, and not telling them that this is an inherent dignity, the right to vote, because we are still here.
Thank you. Next we have our Montgomery County Recorder, Brandon McClain.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. You know, it's been said that if we cannot be secure in our own right to vote, then we also can't be secure in our right to be free. That statement has always been true, but that truth has arguably never rang louder than at this very moment, right now, with the For the People Act and voters' legislation rights hanging in the balance. We've seen the weight and the power that voting has. We've seen it throughout our community. We've seen it in our court systems. We've seen it throughout this country with the various decisions that have been made on our behalf that have impacted and affected our way of life. We've seen it. Voting matters. It always will matter. It always has mattered. It matters. But I want to be clear. Voting consistently, voting regularly, voting often matters more, because there's strength in numbers and voting is leverage. We must vote in each and every election, not just every 4 years, not just for governor, not just for president, but each and every election we must vote, whether it be national or local, because elections have consequences and we bear the weight of those actions. My grandmother, she's 101 years old. She often reminds me that in most things in life, we are either at the table of decision or we're on the menu. We need to make a decision right here, right now, moving forward, where we want to be. Do we want to be a part of the discussion, or do we just want to find out about it secondhand? We need to make sure that we are active participants and that we are involved, because whether we like it or not, decisions are made on our behalf that impact all of us. So why not be a part of that conversation? When it comes to representation, why not be amongst those that chooses who serves us, as opposed to them selecting themselves? This has got to stop. Said it before, I've said it so many times. I'm gonna say it because it needs to be said. Being an elected official is but being an under-shepherd. We are but a cheap imitation of our Father, and we are supposed to be here in his absence to take care of his people. I'm a firm believer that one day when my head is cold, I have to give an accounting to how I treated God's people, when I counted them, many at their lowest points. And this goes for anybody who considers themselves to be a public servant, a person person of the people, because that is who we are all here to serve. So I leave you with this. We are currently in a situation where this dream is not denied, it's certainly deferred. And when we have so many attacks on our very state of democracy, on what makes us a democratic republic, on voting rights, these cuts, democracy bleeds. It's up to us to make sure it doesn't bleed out. We are in a situation where if we don't take care of business today, our children won't have it tomorrow. We need to vote, not like our lives depend on it. We're in our day. We need to vote like our children's lives depend on it. Because it does. The decisions we make today will ultimately impact their lives tomorrow. We need to make the right decisions. We need to wake up. We need to come together, create one unified group of power. That will not happen being separate. That will not happen being divided. It only happens if we come together. That starts now.
Thank you, thank you. The late great John Lewis said that everything that's happened now has happened before. So all the tools that we need to fight this fight, we have been given. Like Amaha would say, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. This fight is not something that's just going to come when it's voting time in May and November. This fight is all year long. They're passing these bills all year long. It's up to us to educate ourselves and educate the people around us so we can know what we need to do. Brother Pastor Don Wilson of Phi Beta Sigma, if you want to come up and talk about the John Lewis Act.
Hello, everyone. One of the things that we know that voting is very important, and we have to start thinking about why are they fighting against this Voting Rights Act? Why all the commotion? Why is Senate stuck? It is because the act requires for certain states and certain places when they attempt to change Voting Rights Acts, that they will have to come and they will have to present what they're doing, and it has to be approved. In other words, there will be a watchdog in place so that when you start doing your mess, or when you're trying to disenfranchise people, that you have to bring those things before a group that will look at it and say, well, yeah, this makes sense, that this is just, and this is fair. So that's what really they're upset about, because they're like, we don't want to have to answer to anyone else. We want our state rights. We want our areas to determine how we do things. But what has happened over the years, areas have determined how they do things, disenfranchise others. Now, I know often we get very upset and we think about it, it's just a Republican thing. But gerrymandering also has happened with Democrats, because they have not always been on our side either. But this act would bring in a way that we can keep those type of things in check. And when things happen, then states, according to what they did, then they will be required, and not only just 1 year, but even years after that, that we will be looking at what they're doing. I think what we need to do also is just hear John Lewis' words, because John Lewis, he didn't just get in good trouble just out of his head, but it was out of his journey and his work. And this is what he said. He said, you are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish your light. Study the path of others to make your way easier and more abundant. Lean toward the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only love, only peace in your heart. knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. Choose confrontation wisely, but when it is your time, don't be afraid to stand up, speak up, and speak out against injustice. And if you follow your truth down the road to peace and affirmation of love, if you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, a world, a community, a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself. So this was actually how he came to that statement of good trouble, that we have the power, that we have the ability, and that we have to learn from those who have gone ahead of us. And in learning, then we construct a plan and show up and talk even when it's unpopular, even when it may lead to trouble. I know John Lewis is one of my frat brothers, and as he was saying these things, and as we came toward the election, in our last election, our last presidential election before this one, when the other person was elected, I heard him, and I heard him clear when he said, get into good trouble. And my way was like, well, how do I get into good trouble? And sometimes we don't know. But my response was, because they said they didn't have enough poll workers. So I decided right then and there that every time there's an election, I would be at the poll working. And I tell you that often I am the only African American at the poll and in the district where people are voting. And so I'm telling you that we need to find a way to get into good trouble. Not just rallies, and rallies are good, and not just marches, and marches are good, but we're going to need to find a way to make action and be visible, because I'm going to tell you, being visible at my polling site, I don't know what they're thinking sometimes, because they're not used to seeing one of us at that site. And where I live, and I live right here in the city. I live on Siebenthaler Avenue, so I'm not talking about that I live somewhere out in a neighborhood that's exclusive. But in those people who vote and show up. So I tell you to find where you're going to serve and how you're going to serve. And I'm going to tell you, don't get mad with the Board of Elections, because they just carry out the rules once they are established. That's what they do. We can keep the Board of Elections in check, but they just carry out the rules. That's why we need laws that before it gets to the Board of Elections to implement what the state has said, that we have checked those things out. And we can only do it by marching to the poll and doing our work, contacting your congressmen. I am so glad that the gerrymandering effort that was tried here in Ohio, that it has been said that it's unconstitutional, and that they have to go back to the drawing board. But I guarantee you they're not going back to the drawing board with us in mind. They're still going to try to pull something. So we have to be diligent and have due diligence and be at the table and not just show up, but to show up with folk behind us, because they don't care with just one of us showing up. It has to be the masses.
All right, give thanks. I want to see where my people are at. Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Yeah, I knew I was in the right place. Give thanks to everybody for being out in the cold. You know, like I was Mayor Mims. He said something that really struck me, right? Talk about after the 2008 election, because I was one of those, right? First time I voted was in 2008. You know what I mean? And But right after we voted, we did high five. I was working in a factory, you know what I mean? Everybody high fiving in the factory, it'll be all just sat back down, and I did nothing, you know what I mean? So I'm one of those people that he talked about, right? You know what I mean? But I learned from that, you know what I mean? And so like, that's what this is all about, but like how we have community power. And like everybody in here, I'm assuming already is registered just that it's too cold to be out here if you wasn't, right? But like, you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the thing is, are we on the same playbook? You know what I mean? Are we singing the same hymn? You know what I mean? Like how are we organizing amongst ourselves, right? Like, is the community driving the politics or the politics driving the community? Right? Like what are we self-determining? Where is our power? You know what I mean? Like our power together to collectively determine what is the future we want to work, live, and play in, and leverage our resources to make that happen. And then bring that down to the voting box, to the ballot, right? And elect officials that are walking in unison with what the vision is for our community. Because now is our time, and we got to act now. So I just want to thank everybody for being out here. Thank all the speakers. You want to say anything closing days? And we are the ones we've been waiting for. And we have the power right here in this circle right now, right, to change the course and support movements that are taking place in our city, in our country, and in our nation, right? Because now is the time. This is like no joke, for real. So, peace and hair grease. You want to say to the close?
I know y'all cold. Nah, but yeah, this is the end of it. Thank you all for coming out. It takes every last one of us. If you work in a barbershop, put some voter registrations in there. You work in a beauty supply, put it in there. Any entrepreneurs that have boutiques, put your voter applications in there. If you don't know if your voter registration is still valid, go to vote.org and check to see if you're still a registered voter, because they can pull that too. So let's just try to exercise all the things that we have. We do have a flyer on social media that's saying who to call. It's giving the exact phone numbers for the 2 Democratic senators that we need to be putting the pressure on. And yeah, you guys have a good one. Stay warm.
Y'all give it up for Deja. MC, give us a Deja. Look, we want to do the 7 Harambes. Harambes mean pulled together. When I was in London with the Queen Mother, she also taught me Harambes mean we're pulling the spirit of the ancestors, the energy of the ancestors to be with us every moment in every decision. So I need everybody to put their hands up. We're doing 7 Harambes. Y'all who walking away, I need your hands up. Need your hands up. Reverend Fox is silly. Here we go. Harambe. 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 Here we go. Harambe. Boom. The ancestors heard you. Now put your feet to walk in action. I'm not here to party now.